He's got Dickie Davis eyes. Hello and welcome back to a special edition, yes, a special edition of the Blackford Book Club. And my friend Bobby has suggested that I read the more personal chapters from my self-published book that I'm going to show you, like a weird magician's assistant, Jason the Impossible, and a Sword of Damocles. But the personal stories are very long chapters, and as we've gathered by now, I am no reader aloud of words, I am no public speaker, but I try. And if you allow me a little narcissistic moment, as I'm surrounded by Mr. Darley and the ghost of Hunter S. Thompson, it's one of my favourite pieces of writing. It's also one of my most personal pieces of writing. And you would not believe how desperate I am to read this with a modicum of justice. So let's just see how we get on. The two Steves head to Europe for the first time. FCSion 1, Liverpool 2. So there we were, Steve the taxi driver and I, or the more commonly known two Steves, excitedly waiting and pacing up and down at 1 AM on a Wednesday morning as we awaited the coach to arrive at the appointed pickup spot at Dover for our rite of passage moment. Not the good-natured abuse we'd shortly receive from a coach full of Liverpool-born Scousers, although that was as guaranteed as soon as we boarded the coach, but our first trip into Europe to watch the Mighty Reds of Liverpool. Being a Liverpool fan of my vintage, European trips were held in the greatest of magical majesty. Rome twice, London and Paris were ingrained on every Reds footballing memory. If you were there on any of the occasions when Old Big Ears was lofted high to the night sky by Emlyn Hughes twice, Phil Thompson, or a one-handed Graham Souness on a gladiatorial night in Rome, then you may as well have hoisted the European Cup for yourself. These were the big European nights, but there were many others, both at home and via the easily duped railway systems of Europe. So this first leg of a second round European Cup Winners' Cup tie in a tiny Swiss town was our rite of passage moment. It was Steve's idea, and after no doubt borrowing a size amount of the £129 from my dear old mum, I was in. I vividly recall talking of nothing else prior to our trip into a European wonderland, and I also vividly recall travelling with just 2 plastic money bags full of 20p's that I'd raided from the change in my whisky bottle that held all my excess money. I was going on my first European trip to watch Liverpool with a handful of coins on the bones of my arse, as we English used to say, and with another Steve, my travelling companion of many a Liverpool game. As the coach slowed in front of us, it was clear it was ours, and we stumbled our way to our allotted seats amid not abuse but certainly wary stares from the 50 or 60 Reds on the coach. We were obviously Southern Reds, and that didn't go in our favour, and so we quickly grabbed our seats and no doubt quietly stared at our shoes for a couple of long hours as we travelled into northern France. These Reds had already travelled 6 hours from Liverpool, and here we were, a couple of smiling southern interlopers boarding their coach. I would have probably given these two soft lads a wary stare or barbed comment too, if I were in their shoes, but then again, 36 hours later we were the kings of the coach, and cheered to the rafters like returning heroes from the Great War, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. The journey through to Switzerland was uneventful, or certainly my memory tells me so. The literary liar in me wants to tell tales of becoming the merry prankster on the coach, winning over my fellow Reds and catching them in my atmospheric net. But I probably just stared at my shoes. But I was indeed excited and couldn't wait to arrive and check into a foreign hotel in Switzerland, see the sights, and watch my beloved Reds in a European match in Europe. This may not have been Spartak Vladikavkaz when in 1995 a literal handful of Reds made it through the vaunted Iron Curtain of Eastern Europe, nor was it Dinamo Tbilisi or indeed Dinamo Bucharest in 1984 when, again in the dark and foreboding surrounds of Eastern Europe, the camera panned around the ground after Ian Rush's beautiful winning goal on a veritable swamp of a pitch, and you could make out the occasional body in the crowd going wild with delight, wild with Scouse delight. Thousands of miles away from home and behind that invisible Cold War curtain were handfuls of Liverpool fans jigging with delight and all before the advent of easy, catered-for, pre-planned, organised trips. Just like the one I was lucky enough to be on, and after staring at my shoes for what seemed like an eternity, we arrived. Checked in, and with the late afternoon and evening to ourselves, the match was the following night. We did the obligatory hanging of my Liverpool flag in the bedroom, and then for some reason we then climbed out onto the roof of the hotel, no doubt to get a better glimpse of the snow-covered mountains that surrounded us. Now, I could tell you of the evening we spent in the obligatory Irish bar, and of this moody-looking older red who seemed to be holding court in some Sicilian Godfather type way. This guy just seemed to be the literal centre of this place, and albeit a flying visitor, everything seemed to gravitate around him. But I might have just made that passage up, a kind of sleight of hand, a decoy and an end around just to deviate away from extolling the dull virtues of getting drunk in an Irish bar in Switzerland and having no recollection of such events whatsoever. But I do remember Don Corleone. Strange how the mind works sometimes, isn't it? Anyway, I'll tell you about my mate Chris instead. So we're in this tiny Swiss town of Sion, a town that I remember and have constantly remembered for well over 20 years now as a quaint, idyllic and beautiful little town that was incredibly friendly, open and, despite looking on in somewhat constant bemusement at the 1,000 to 1,500 Liverpool fans meandering through their tiny hamlet and probably wondering why, they were brilliantly welcoming and perfect hosts. Sion has since achieved a slight notoriety in the world of the Olympic Games as they have bid for and had their bid rejected for 4 Winter Olympics since 1972, with their most recent bid costing this relatively small town in Switzerland 5 million to bid for and lose in their attempt for the 2026 Games. So we're in Sion, it's warm and welcoming, I'm with Steve the taxi driver, and I'm about to wax lyrical about a friend back in Portsmouth named Chris. Indeed I am. But there's a reason for this minor segue, 2 actually, and it really hits at the heart of all of my writings: humanity and human friendships. Chris and I have been friends for many years by the time of my journey to Switzerland as a rather naive and long-haired 24-year-old lover from Portsmouth. We met and bonded tightly at senior school over our mutual loves of football, the ska band madness, repeat viewings of the UK TV series Auf Wiedersehen Pet, and of course the raging hormones surging through our young bodies for the enticing beauty of the opposite sex. Chris's mum and dad welcomed me into the family as one of their own, one of many such families that have taken me in over the years and for which I'll be eternally grateful. And were utter gems, and my abiding memory of many a walk home from school and walking ahead of the next bus into town and indeed home was Chris cycling up to me, dismounting, and we'd shoot the shit with each other as buses passed merrily on by for a couple of miles until we reached his house and I'd catch the next double-decker bus home. But we don't have time to indulge in this type of schmaltzy nostalgia, for we have an appointment with a pole dancer and a rather lovely, if awkward, massage. So let's move this story on, shall we? You see, Chris was a diamond, an absolute gentleman and a cliched salt-of-the-earth human being, and one with whom I'm honoured to have called my friend for many years. I litter my stories with tangents, as you may have noticed, and that's not always consciously, which is a terrifying thought if you come to think about it. But I also litter my stories and tilt them in favour of the many friends and friendships gained, and the human beings I've made these memories with over the years, so Chris joins a gaggle of characters named in the introduction, as well as in the chapters to come, from Mark to Matt, Adam to Steve-O, Larry to Gareth, with the latter 2 being some of the funniest and warmest human beings to have ventured out of the nearby Principality of Wales in many a stereophonic song, and fortunately, into my life in the process. I could weave a tale of those awkward steps on a smelly coach to rejoining it a day and a half later a hero, and maybe I will, and maybe I already have. I could narrate a short ditty of seeing a Liverpool legend and a coming Liverpool god both scoring and giving me the perfect trip into Europe, watching the Mighty Reds of Liverpool. I could do that, and I hope perhaps I will, but all of this is a peripheral scene setting for yet more human friendships bleeding across the decades of life, and my memories of Sion, Chris, Steve, and the other aforementioned friends that give me a great reason to continue smiling. Chris was, and I have no doubts, still a huge supporter of Pompey and forever dyed in royal blue footballing faith of our hometown, Portsmouth. He had a sneaky love of Liverpool just as I did for his team in return, and I still follow their fortunes from a disinterested distance. We hung out a lot, bunked off school and smoked cigarettes, both more than we should, and we talked football incessantly. I called for him one sunny afternoon. Remember calling for someone as a kid and just randomly knocking on a mate's door for a game of football or cricket? Writing this as an hors d'oeuvre in early 2023 before the main meal to come sounds like something from a 1950s family drama novel. I'm just going to call on Chris. And call I did, to be ushered into the garden by a very excited Chris, who immediately pointed me in the direction of his mum's washing line, whereby resided a Russian flag, a genuine, bona fide, all the way from behind the Iron Curtain, Russian national flag. And Chris had lovingly painted Liverpool through the middle. And it was a present for me. Chris had been gifted the flag by another friend whose father was from Russia and returned from the motherland with the prize booty of a genuine national flag. Chris was made up with the gift, as I distinctly remember him telling me the short tale I've regurgitated above. Quite some gift in the late 1980s, I can tell you, and my mate Chris, unbeknownst to me, had gifted it to me. With both his unique painting and canny foresight to know that over 2 decades later an aspiring writer would use his ingenuity, kindness and friendship to try and crowbar this tale into an otherwise unconnected tale, I have a genuine Russian national flag of the era gifted to me by a diamond of a friend, and needless to say, I still have that, albeit worn and rather tatty, national flag of Russia to this very day. It's not a Russian flag of today's vintage, but I refuse to backname the country, or indeed the Federation. Plus, given the chance, I'd make a strong argument that Russia, the CCCP, the USSR, or the Russian Federation have changed their name more times than the current terrorist organisations that blight our world, as well as changing their name as regularly as their underwear. But, talking of underwear, Steve and I had breakfast on the morning of the match before a stroll around the beautiful town of Sion and before taking up a quiet and gentlemanly position outside a local taverna for what was planned to be a quiet couple of hours drinking and enjoying the sights and the excited expectations for the match later. For a little context, we may share the same Christian name, but our demeanours were polar opposites. Whereas I am, despite evidence to the contrary and the words penned here, a rather shy type who prefers a quiet, unhassled life, Steve was far more outgoing, forthcoming, open, and with a zest for life and a Lothario's eye for a beautiful lady. Just as luck would have it, such a beautiful Swiss lady strolled past, and at first declining Steve's offer of a drink, circled back slowly as we stated our innocent intentions, and we had a delightful time, if a little grating, as there was a distinct language barrier between us. By which I mean we didn't speak a word of French, and my German is borderline childish, and she just looked at us with utter befuddlement and a shrug of the shoulders. It was all rather akin to a stage comedy of a couple of mildly drunk Tommies left over in Switzerland after the Great War. However, Mr. Lothario was managing to break said barrier, and minutes later he said, "Come on, we're off," or words to that effect, and words that completely shocked me, as well as our coach comrades who saw us waltz along the high street and way into the distance arm in arm with this lovely Swiss lady in between us. The next hour or so of my life wasn't, or isn't in retrospect, particularly exciting, nor are there any nefarious drug deals involved or large volumes of shots or alcohol consumed before an approximate 3.5 minutes of drunken debauchery. You won't find any of that here. But in between being cheered as we walked away from the coach and being roared back onto it, late, and before we travelled to the match itself, contained a Lothario who desperately wanted to have a pun-laden Swiss roll and a long-haired lover from Portsmouth who just smoked too many cigarettes out of this lovely lady's window and a window onto a quite beautiful world indeed. Of rolling hills, mountains, snow-capped ones too, and some far in the distant square dots that our host assured us were indeed houses and taverns and a lap dancing club. You see, our Swiss companion was a lap dancer who, despite the language barrier between us, insisted on topping up our drinks before returning in her lap dancing outfit. Obviously we had no real idea this was happening, but moments later, happen it did, and no doubt both of our jaws hit the wooden floors of her flat. She danced, alas without a pole, but she took great pains to point out roughly on the hill where her dancing pole resided, and then insisted, probably at Mr. Lothario's urging, a massage. Now, dear reader, I will not bear false witness and say gallantly that I did not partake in the massage, because I did, and it was simply that, a massage, a minute, 2 tops. It was all rather awkward, as well as wondering if this was all just a Salvador Dali twisted dream of mine, and while Steve, shall we say, wanted rather more than the massage, I smoked a cigarette or two out of this lovely lady's window onto the world, and no doubt chuckled to myself at the utter absurdity of this random situation. We said our goodbyes, mine more in relief, Mr. Lothario's exasperated and without relief. And we ambled our way back towards the coach, and arriving a few minutes late, and indeed incredibly lucky the coach waited for us at all, but rather than being scorned at for being late, we were cheered like Roman gladiators returning from a bloody battle. As the coach jerked its way towards the stadium, we were bombarded with questions, as well as being absolutely roasted, as the kids say today. Look, all we got was a back massage, and she was a lap dancer, and, she danced for us too. It's not exactly a watertight defence, I'll grant you, but those words were as true then as they are today. For roughly an hour, maybe a little more, we shared the bizarre company of a beautiful soul, a stranger to boot, and a stranger who simply shared a drink with a couple of English fools, and before those fools knew it, they were back on a coach full of drunken football fans, and their only defence, their one and only defence, was to lift their shirts and ask their inquisitors to smell their backs. See, we probably said in unison, can you smell the Nivea cream? That's what she used. Again, not a defence that's going to win you championships, nor a particularly exciting story, but a true one, and regardless, we could have said anything on that particular night, as frankly no one really cared. Print the legend. Now let's get to the reason why I travelled on a cold coach for a combined 40 plus hours to a tiny town in Switzerland, shall we? Upon alighting from the coach, we were hit with a constant chant of "Hop Sion! Come on Sion!" and the vociferous locals waving these really small white flags emblazoned with the same "Hop Sion" slogan. I just felt really strange and strangely honoured to simply be outside a foreign and European football ground and about to enter and watch my boyhood team play in European competition for the first time. I would in future be lucky enough to visit the Westfalenstadion in Dortmund, the Stadio Olimpico in Rome, and realise a long-held dream of attending the Camp Nou in Barcelona, but all such luxurious fripperies were for the future. We took our spot in the Stade de Tourbillon, and in a game I only vaguely remember for Robbie Fowler's goal, a goalmouth scramble, and a beauty from John Barnes, which was at the opposite end of the stadium from us, and quite a fierce shot, if memory serves. Those goals secured Liverpool a valuable, if expected, 2-1 away win. The Reds would take this 2-1 lead into the second leg in 14 days' time and back in Liverpool, but before such matters we ambled back on a cold coach for umpteen hours before finally reaching Dover on our departure from our new-found friends and those who had a further 6 hours to go on Ice Station Zebra before they could finally depart for good. I'm almost certain I drove us from Portsmouth to Dover, and so would then have found the car for the return journey, and a journey that took us nearly as long, but in the opposite direction from our Liverpudlian friends. We would be back at that exact same picking up spot in Dover just 6 short months later, and an even shorter journey this time to Paris, and for the semi-final with the French Capitals team, Paris Saint-Germain, and another small footballing dream of mine would soon be realised as I attended the famed Parc des Princes. But all of this, and much more, was for the future. As we ambled our way back in Freddie, my tiny white Fiat and trusty steed for nearly all of our footballing journeys, we no doubt chuckled about the pole dancing escapade, the fact I ran out of money and Steve kindly fronted me for a few Swiss hours in a strangely beautiful town, and a tiny town who welcomed us with such open-hearted warmth, as well as a surreal lap dance for a couple of giggling fools. Also for the future were immediate trips to London for a 1-1 draw with Charlton in the League Cup, a 2-1 win at Anfield 4 days later over Derby County, and 3 more games in 11 November days as my travelling pal and I went to Ellen Road, Leeds for a 2-0 win, Anfield for the Merseyside Derby in a 1-1 draw with Everton, and a 4-2 win in the League Cup against old adversaries Arsenal. Steve and I went to a lot of games in this particular season and slightly above average for the large number of games we attended as a matter of course. Trips to London followed in the new year, Tottenham, Chelsea and Wimbledon, as well as a handful of games at Anfield, and for Steve in particular, a painful non-attendance of a game as he was dreadfully swindled out of a large sum of money to go to Norway in March to see the Reds in the quarter-final of the same competition, the European Cup Winners' Cup, against SK Brann Bergen. I couldn't afford such a luxury again, but Steve rounded up the required money and saw it disappear in the flash of a con man's eye. How he gathered together the money just 1 month later I have no idea, but he did, and we were about to journey back to Dover for the short hop across the English Channel and to Paris for the semi-final, and for me to selfishly realise a dream and attend the famed Parc des Princes in Paris. So there we go. Couple of stumbles. I'm going to forgive myself. That was for Steve the taxi driver, and for all of you watching in the void of the matrix. I do sincerely watching a half man, half biscuit, surrounded by Salvador Dali and the ghost of Hunter S. Thompson, sat in the corner of his room, reading aloud, trying to read aloud, from my self-published book that I'm immensely proud of. And I leave you, as I always do, in peace and in solidarity. And thanks very much for watching.